So our next moral theory that we're going to discuss is our first moral objectivist theory. So cultural relativism was our example of moral relativism. We're going to set that aside now. From now on, we're going to be focusing on moral objectivist theories. To refresh our memories, this means that there is a fact to the matter in the world. Moral standards apply to everyone. And the first one we're going to discuss is utilitarianism. Okay, that's how that word is pronounced. Utilitarianism. I know it's long. I know it looks like it's got a lot of I's and T's. Utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is actually a brand of what we call consequentialism. Consequentialism says that morality is determined by the consequences of the action. Okay? Consequentialism says that the part of the action that makes the action right or wrong is the consequences. So murder is wrong if it brings about bad consequences. Telling the truth is right if it brings about good consequences. There are different brands of consequentialism. So what we have to determine is what constitutes good consequences and bad consequences. Okay? And our different brands of consequentialism offer up different answers to this question. For utilitarianism, the principle of utility tells us what makes good consequences and what doesn't. For the principle of utility, the morally best action, in other words, the good consequences, are when the most overall well-being is brought about. Okay? So the principle of utility says that what we're looking for in good consequences is that it maximizes overall well-being. Okay? Good consequences are those that maximize overall well-being. When we combine consequentialism and principle of utility, we get act utilitarianism. Okay? Act utilitarianism says an action is right if and only if it brings about the most overall well-being. You'll see how that works, right? Morality is determined by, the action that brings about the most overall well-being. That makes utilitarianism, okay? Don't overthink that one, okay? We're adding 2 and 2 and we're getting 4, okay? So act utilitarianism says an action is right if it brings about the most overall well-being. Okay, what this means is if you're going to go to perform an action, you have to consider the consequences. You have to consider which actions are going to produce the most happiness and the least amount of pain. Okay? So what we are supposed to be doing is producing the most happiness and the least amount of pain. This is not trying to make everybody happy, okay? Utilitarianism is not the same thing as you have to make everybody happy. It very well might be some people are not happy. But if the happiness that is produced among everybody involved is the most happiness that can be produced, then the action is right. But that might mean one person has to suffer. Okay? It might be, okay, consider this. And these are scenarios we've heard about, in real life. It might be that to save 1,000 people, one person has to die. Okay? So one person has to sacrifice himself. Maybe it's tackling a bomber before he gets into a building with 1,000 people in it and setting off the bomb, and the bomber and he both die. Okay? So that person, those 2 people have died. That one person has sacrificed himself. His family will mourn his death, but the 1,000 people who live, that happiness that comes from 1,000 people surviving outweighs the pain of the one person dying and the mourning by the family. Does that make sense? So one person might have to sacrifice in order for the most happiness to be produced. Does that make sense? I mean, consider this. Consider if you've ever... So you're with a group of friends and y'all are trying to decide what to do, and everybody wants to do one thing, but you don't really want to do it. But you know it's going to make everybody happy if you just go along, okay? You don't really want to go see that, horror movie, but everybody really wants you to join them, and they all really want to see the horror movie. So you sacrifice your temporary happiness to make them happy, okay? It's the same idea here, just the bombers on a bigger scale. We're not going to make everybody happy. Utilitarianism would never claim we need to make everybody happy. The key is producing the most overall happiness for everybody involved. And that means sometimes somebody has to be sacrificed. Maybe somebody has to be really unhappy for a short term for everybody else to be happy. Maybe one person has to die for thousands of people to live. It's just, the way it goes.